trying to predict what's going to happen in crypto is like, I don't know, reading tea leaves or something.
Yeah.
But today we're dishing the tea leaves, and we're diving deep into some seriously data-driven Sui price predictions. We've got 3 sources to work with today: Changelly, CoinCodex, and CoinCheckup. So let's see what these oracles have in store for us.
Yeah, it's fascinating because we're looking at sources that are using pure technical analysis. Some are taking a more historical approach to like tech adoption, and some are even looking at global money flows. So we're really getting a multi-dimensional view of Sui's potential here.
Okay, before we get lost in the weeds, remind me, what's all the hype around Sui right now?
Well, Sui is a layer 1 blockchain, which means it's a platform. You can build all sorts of decentralized applications on it. But what really sets it apart is its focus on speed and scalability. It's designed to handle a massive amount of transactions super quickly, something that a lot of existing blockchains struggle with.
Right, because if we're talking about blockchains that are going to power, real-world applications, from gaming to finance, it needs to be able to keep up. And Sui's price has really been impressive.
Absolutely. In the last year alone, its price has gone up by 638%. And even in just the last week, it's up 25%. So it's definitely catching the attention of investors.
Wow. And Sui is currently sitting at number 46 in the entire crypto ecosystem as of today, December 13th, 2024. Our sources have it at around $4.77.
Right. Give or take a cent or two.
Yeah.
And that's just the current price. When we look at the short-term predictions, what could happen in the coming days and weeks, things get pretty interesting.
Okay. What kind of short-term moves are these sources predicting?
Well, both Changelly and CoinCodex are feeling pretty bullish. CoinCodex thinks Sui could hit $6.16 in the next month. But Changelly is even more optimistic, with a target of $15.38 in the same time frame.
Whoa. They're expecting some serious upward momentum. What about CoinCheckup?
They've actually got 2 short-term predictions. Next week, they're predicting Sui will reach $6.93, which is a 49% increase. But their monthly prediction is more in line with Changelly's at $15.38.
So it seems like the general consensus is Sui's going to keep climbing in the short term. I'm curious, though, what's driving all this optimism?
I think part of it is just market sentiment. The Fear and Greed Index for Sui is currently at 76, which puts it in extreme greed territory.
Okay, so investors are pretty excited about Sui right now. But isn't there a flip side to that? Doesn't extreme greed sometimes lead to a correction?
Yeah, that's the thing about market sentiment. When everyone's feeling bullish, it can drive the price up really quickly. But it can also lead to a sharp drop if that sentiment changes.
So should people be cautious about jumping on the Sui bandwagon right now? Or is this a get in while you can type of situation?
Well, that's where the long-term predictions come in. And those are really fascinating because that's where we start to see some differences in opinion. Each of our sources has laid out these year-by-year predictions, all the way to 2030 for Sui.
And do those long-term predictions paint a similar picture? Continued upward growth.
The general sentiment is bullish, but the optimism varies quite a bit. In 2025, for instance, CoinCodex is predicting that Sui could reach highs of $22.35, while Changelly gives us a range, estimating an average price somewhere between $9.25 and $15.84.
Okay, so already by 2025, we're seeing a difference in how much growth is expected. What about CoinCheckup? They kind of take a different approach, right?
Yeah, they do. CoinCheckup's long-term predictions are actually based on historical adoption rates of technologies like Google, Facebook, and mobile phones. So they're essentially asking, what if Sui follows a similar trajectory to these other game-changing innovations?
That's a cool way to think about it. So what kind of numbers do they come up with using this historical comparison?
Well, their most optimistic scenario, based on Facebook-like growth, puts Sui at $34.88 by 2029. But their most conservative scenario, modeled after mobile phone adoption, predicts a much lower price of $2.23 by the same year.
Wow, that's a huge difference. Really highlights the uncertainty of trying to predict the future, even when you're using all this historical data.
Yeah, exactly. There are just so many factors that can influence a technology's adoption rate. It's impossible to know for sure which path Sui will follow.
So looking even further out, do these sources see Sui continuing to go up? Or do things start to level off?
Well, in 2030, we see maybe the most extreme difference of opinion. CoinCodex, a resident optimist, predicts a potential high of $30.34 for Sui.
Okay. CoinCodex is still firmly on the Sui rocket ship.
Yeah.
What about CoinCheckup? I have a feeling their prediction might be a little more grounded.
You're right. Their 2030 prediction is only $2.33.
Wow. That is quite a reality check compared to CoinCodex's $30. Why such a huge discrepancy?
It really comes down to their methodology. CoinCodex is using technical analysis, looking at charts and patterns and indicators. But CoinCheckup is basing their long-term prediction on internet adoption rates, which have historically been much slower and steadier, compared to something like the explosive growth of Facebook.
So they're saying, yeah, Sui could totally take off, but sustainable growth often takes time.
Right.
It's kind of like the tortoise and the hare.
Exactly. And both approaches have their merits. It's important to consider both the technical indicators and the broader historical context when you're evaluating these long-term predictions.
We've talked about predictions based on technical analysis and historical adoption rates, but CoinCheckup also uses this unique method that looks at worldwide money flows.
Right. They compare Sui's potential to different measures of the global money supply, like M0, M1, and M2.
Okay, I think I'm going to need a quick explainer on that one. What are M0, M1, and M2, and how do they even relate to Sui's price?
You can think of them as different ways of measuring how much money is circulating around the world. M0 is the most liquid form of money, basically physical cash, and reserves held by central banks. M1 includes M0, plus checking accounts and other easily accessible funds. And M2 is the broadest measure. It includes M1, plus things like savings accounts, money market funds, and other less liquid assets.
So they're basically looking at how much money is out there in the world, and then trying to estimate how much of that might flow into crypto, and specifically into Sui.
Exactly.
Interesting. What kind of price predictions do they get using this method?
Well, their predictions vary depending on what level of crypto adoption they're projecting. If only a small percentage of the M0 money supply flows into crypto, they predict Sui could be worth around 85 cents. But if we see significant adoption across the much broader M2 money supply, their prediction jumps to $12.11.
So even with this more like macro approach, we're still seeing a pretty wide range of possibilities. It seems like no matter how you slice it, predicting the future of crypto is as much art as it is science.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's so important to go beyond just the predictions themselves and really understand the factors that are driving them. And that's where we get into the nitty-gritty of technical analysis.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What are some of the technical indicators that CoinCodex and CoinCheckup are using to try to predict these price movements for Sui?
One of the key indicators they both mention is the RSI, or Relative Strength Index. It's basically a momentum oscillator that measures the magnitude of recent price changes to evaluate whether an asset is overbought or oversold.
Okay. And what's the RSI saying about Sui right now? Are there any warning signs?
It's currently in overbought territory, which suggests that this recent price surge we've seen with Sui might be due for a correction.
Interesting. So even though the sentiment is generally bullish, these technical indicators are giving us a little bit of a warning sign. Are there any other technical points that stand out to you from these sources?
Both sources talk about support and resistance levels, which are basically these price points, where an asset tends to stall or reverse its direction, like psychological barriers in the market.
Okay, I can see how that would be important for traders, trying to time their buys and sells. But for someone like me, who's more interested in the big picture, what do these support and resistance levels tell us about Sui's potential?
They can give us clues about the strength of a trend. If Sui breaks through a strong resistance level, it could signal a big upward move. But if it drops below a key support level, it might suggest a weakening of that bullish momentum.
So it's like a tug of war between buyers and sellers. And these support and resistance levels are the battle lines.
Exactly. And right now, with that RSI in overbought territory, it seems like the sellers might be gaining a bit of an advantage. But it's important to remember, technical analysis is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot more to think about when we're assessing Sui's long-term potential.
Well, that brings us perfectly to the next part of this deep dive. We've looked at all the price predictions, but now we're going to go beyond the numbers and really delve into what makes Sui tick.
We'll look at its technology, the team behind it, and its real-world applications, after all. Those are the things that will ultimately determine whether Sui can live up to all the hype.
Stay with us as we take a deep dive into the heart of Sui. Okay, so we've talked about the price predictions, gotten a sense of the market sentiment around Sui, but now I'm ready to dig a little deeper. What is it about Sui's technology that has people so excited?
One of the things that really sets Sui apart is its approach to consensus. You know, the process by which a blockchain network agrees on the validity of transactions. Sui uses this really novel algorithm called Narwhal and Tusk.
Okay. That sounds pretty intimidating. Can you break it down for me? What's so special about Narwhal and Tusk?
Well, the really cool thing about Narwhal and Tusk is its ability to process transactions in parallel instead of sequentially. So it's kind of like having multiple lanes on a highway instead of everybody being stuck in a single line.
So other blockchains are processing transactions one at a time. While Sui can handle multiple transactions at the same time, that sounds like a big deal for speed and efficiency.
Yeah, it is. It's a game changer. This parallel processing capability allows Sui to achieve much higher throughput and really reduce transaction times dramatically. It's one of the key reasons why Sui is able to boast this kind of speed and scalability that other blockchains just can't match.
So it's like the difference between using dial-up internet and having a fiber optic connection.
That's a great analogy. It's a fundamental shift. That allows Sui to handle a much higher volume of activity without getting bogged down. And that's absolutely essential if you're talking about a blockchain that can support real-world applications with millions or even billions of users.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I remember reading something about Sui using object-centric programming. What is that, and how does that fit into the bigger picture?
Well, most blockchains are built around what's called a transaction-centric model, where every action is treated as a separate transaction. But Sui flips that on its head. It uses an object-centric approach, which means that data is treated as objects with inherent properties and logic.
I'm trying to visualize that. Can you give me an example of how that works in practice?
Sure. Let's say you want to transfer ownership of a digital asset. On a traditional blockchain, you typically need to create a smart contract to handle all the steps involved in that transfer. But on Sui, that ownership information is already embedded within the object itself.
Oh, I see. So it's like the difference between having to write out this detailed legal contract every time you want to sell something versus just handing someone a receipt. That proves they now own it.
That's a great way to put it. Sui's object-centric approach really simplifies development, and it reduces the need for these really complex smart contracts, which can be time-consuming and expensive to create.
So it's not just about speed, it's about making it easier for developers to build on Sui.
Right. And this object-centric approach also has implications for scalability. Because objects can be processed independently, it further enhances Sui's ability to handle lots of activity without getting bottlenecked.
Okay, so Sui is making some pretty fundamental changes to how blockchains work. But as we all know, technology is only as good as the people behind it. What can you tell me about the team behind Sui? Are they up to the task of delivering on all of these promises?
That's one of the things that really excites me about Sui. The team is made up of some of the brightest minds in the blockchain space. You've got leading engineers and cryptographers, many of whom have backgrounds at top tech companies like Meta, formerly Facebook.
Oh, wow. So they're not just like blockchain enthusiasts. They've got real experience building these large-scale systems that actually work in the real world. That's definitely a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. They understand the challenges of building for mass adoption, which is really crucial if Sui is going to move beyond just the crypto niche.
And that brings up a good point. We've talked about all this really impressive technology, but where is Sui actually being used today? What kind of real-world applications is it powering?
Well, one of the areas where Sui is generating a lot of buzz is gaming. Its speed and low transaction costs make it really well suited for building highly interactive and responsive games.
I can see that. Gamers are a pretty demanding bunch. They want things to happen quickly and seamlessly. Lag is not an option.
Right. And with traditional blockchains, those high transaction fees and slow processing times have been a major obstacle for blockchain-based games. But Sui's architecture is really designed to overcome those limitations.
It's like finally having a blockchain that can keep up with a fast-paced world of gaming.
Exactly. And beyond gaming, Sui has potential applications in really any area that requires high throughput and low latency. Things like decentralized finance, supply chain management, even identity verification could all benefit from Sui's capabilities.
So potentially a wide range of applications across a lot of different industries.
Yeah.
But, let's be realistic. There are always challenges when it comes to new technology. What are some of the hurdles that Sui might face on its way to becoming a major player in the crypto world?
Well, one of the biggest challenges for any new blockchain, especially a layer 1 blockchain like Sui, is competition. We touched on this earlier, but it's really worth emphasizing. The crypto space is incredibly dynamic, with new projects and innovations emerging all the time.
So it's not enough for Sui to just be good. It needs to be better than all the alternatives. And those alternatives are constantly evolving too.
Exactly. And another risk factor to consider is just the overall volatility of the crypto market. We've seen how quickly things can change, and those really wild price swings can impact even the most promising projects.
Right. We were just talking about how Sui's up over 600% in the last year. That kind of growth is incredible, but it also suggests that there's a high level of risk. What goes up can also come down. And in the crypto world, those downswings can be pretty dramatic.
For sure. And it's not always about market sentiment. There are external factors too, like regulatory changes. That could have a big impact on Sui's future.
Yeah. We talked about how Changelly highlighted some potential regulatory risks for Sui.
Right. And that's definitely something to keep an eye on. The regulatory landscape for crypto is still evolving, and any new rules or restrictions could create a lot of uncertainty for projects like Sui.
So even if Sui has the best technology and the most talented team, there are still these outside forces that could influence its success. It's kind of like a company launching this amazing new product, but then having to deal with all these unexpected tariffs or trade restrictions.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Right.
And even if the regulations are favorable, there's still the challenge of adoption. For Sui to really succeed, it needs to move beyond the crypto niche and gain traction in the real world.
Right. It's like having this state-of-the-art smartphone that nobody actually uses. The technology might be brilliant, but if it doesn't solve real problems or create value for people, it's not going to go anywhere.
That's the ultimate test for any blockchain. Can it deliver on its promises and make a real impact on how we live, work, and interact with each other? And that brings us to another really critical aspect of Sui that I think is often overlooked when we get so focused on technology and price predictions. And that's the community.
Ah, yes. The people. The heart and soul of any decentralized project.
Yeah.
What's the community vibe like around Sui?
It's still early days, of course, but Sui already has a really vibrant and passionate community of developers, investors, and enthusiasts, and that's essential for driving adoption and building a sustainable ecosystem.
Right. It's like that old saying, if you build it, they will come. But it only really works if you have a community that's excited to spread the word and actually use what you've built.
Exactly, and that community engagement is definitely something to watch closely. As Sui continues to evolve, a strong community can provide valuable feedback, contribute to development, and act as these really powerful evangelists for the project.
So it's like having a built-in marketing and R&D team. But it also brings up something we talked about earlier, competition. Sui's not the only project out there trying to solve these speed and scalability challenges of blockchain.
Absolutely not. The crypto space is incredibly dynamic. Sui faces competition from a lot of other Layer 1 blockchains, each with its own strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. So it's not just about how good Sui's technology is, it's also about how it stacks up against all the alternatives. And those alternatives are constantly evolving and improving as well.
For sure. That's why it's so important to stay informed about the broader blockchain landscape and really track how Sui is positioned within it.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the more technical side of Sui, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, first and foremost, Sui isn't just tweaking existing blockchain models. They're introducing some pretty fundamental changes that are designed for speed, scalability, and user-friendliness.
It's like they're rewriting the rulebook on how blockchains can operate. And they've got a team with serious credentials to back up those ambitions.
Exactly. But as tempting as those price predictions are, it's really crucial to remember that Sui's long-term success is going to depend on a lot more than just hype and speculation.
Things like real-world adoption, a thriving community, and successfully navigating this, ever-changing regulatory landscape.
Exactly.
So as we move to the final part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring some of those potential risks and challenges that Sui might face on its journey to becoming a major player in the crypto world. So get your critical thinking caps on, listeners, because it's time to consider both the bright possibilities and the potential pitfalls that might lie ahead for Sui. Okay, so we've talked about Sui's impressive price performance, its innovative technology, and the really strong team behind it. But now it's time to put on those critical thinking caps and take a closer look at some of the risks and challenges that Sui might face in the years to come.
You're absolutely right, because no investment is without risk, and the crypto world especially is notoriously volatile and unpredictable.
So what are some of the red flags or potential pitfalls that investors should be aware of when they're considering Sui?
One of the biggest risks for any new blockchain project, especially a Layer 1 blockchain like Sui, is competition. We've touched on this a couple times already, but it's worth really diving a bit deeper. The crypto landscape is just so crowded. There are tons of projects out there, all vying for attention and market share.
Yeah, it really is. It's like a jungle out there. And Sui's not just competing with other new projects, it's also going up against these established players, like Ethereum.
Exactly. Ethereum is still the dominant platform for smart contracts and decentralized applications. It's got that huge first mover advantage, a massive developer community, and literally billions of dollars locked up in its ecosystem.
So Ethereum is kind of like the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and Sui is the ambitious newcomer trying to challenge its dominance.
I like that analogy. And to make things even more challenging, Ethereum isn't just sitting around. They're actively working on upgrades to improve their own scalability and efficiency.
So it's not a static target. Ethereum is constantly evolving, which means Sui needs to keep innovating if it wants to stay ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. And it's not just Ethereum that Sui needs to worry about. There are other newer blockchains out there, like Solana and Cardano, that are also making some pretty significant strides.
So it really is like a constant arms race. Everyone is trying to build the fastest, most scalable, most user-friendly blockchain platform.
That's a great way to put it. And for investors, this creates a lot of uncertainty. It's really tough to predict which of these projects is ultimately going to come out on top.
Right. It's not just about picking a project with good technology. You have to consider how that technology compares to all the other options out there, both now and in the future.
And that future is constantly changing. New projects are emerging all the time. Existing projects are evolving. It's a very dynamic space.
Okay, so competition is definitely a major risk factor for Sui. What are some other things investors should be thinking about?
Another big one is just the inherent volatility of the crypto market. We've already talked about how Sui's price has surged over 600% in the last year, but those kinds of gains are often followed by corrections.
Yeah, what goes up can also come down. And in crypto, those downswings can be pretty steep and pretty sudden.
Exactly. And it's not always rational. Crypto markets are driven a lot by sentiment, speculation, even social media trends.
So Sui's price could be impacted by things that are totally outside of its control, even if this technology is really solid.
That's the nature of the crypto market.
And then there's the regulatory landscape, which is always a big question mark for any crypto project. We mentioned earlier that Changelly highlighted some potential regulatory risks for Sui.
Yeah.
What kind of things are they worried about?
Well, governments around the world are still trying to figure out how to regulate cryptocurrencies. There's a lot of debate about how to balance innovation with consumer protection.
Right. Some people think that crypto should be lightly regulated to allow for more innovation. And others believe that we need stricter regulations to prevent fraud and protect investors.
Exactly. And the outcome of that debate is going to have a big impact on the future of crypto projects like Sui.
So investors need to be aware that regulatory changes could create some headwinds for Sui, even if it's a really fundamentally sound project.
Absolutely. And even if the regulations are favorable, there's still the challenge of adoption. For Sui to truly succeed, it needs to break out of that crypto niche and gain mainstream adoption.
Yeah. It's like having this amazing new social media platform with all the bells and whistles.
Yeah.
But if people don't actually use it, it doesn't really matter how good it is.
That's right. At the end of the day, the success of any blockchain project, whether it's Sui or something else, depends on its ability to solve real problems and create value for users.
So as an investor, you can't just look at price predictions and get excited about the potential gains. You also need to ask some tough questions for these longer-term challenges. Think about the competitive landscape. Think about the regulatory environment. Think about the potential for real-world adoption.
And remember, all the sources that we've looked at in this deep dive, Changelly, CoinCodex, and CoinCheckup, they've provided a lot of really valuable data and insights, but they're just a starting point.
Right. They've given us a map, but it's up to each individual investor to choose their own path and do their own research.
Exactly.
It's like we've given you a taste of the Sui ecosystem, but now it's up to you to explore it further and make your own informed decisions.
And as always in the world of crypto, knowledge is power. The more you understand the technology, the team, the use cases, and the potential risks, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this space.
So stay curious, stay informed, and never be afraid to ask questions. And as always, if you have any thoughts or questions about Sui or anything else we've discussed in this deep dive, please let us know. Until next time, happy exploring.